All right, welcome one and all to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm Connor. That's Phil.
It's me.
Hey. In the new year, Phil, I want you to know I will be expecting increasingly animated acknowledgements of your introduction.
That is just not going to happen.
Do a Fonzie style A like I just did. You can do it better than me. Do French, c'est moi. You know?
I regret ever giving you any encouragement.
Welcome to Heavy Hands, everyone. We've got we're heading into the weird part of the year, basically, where we have a week off ahead of us. Fortunately, sometime very soon, I think in the lead up to the UFC 282, the Prochazka Teixeira rematch, we're going to be like absolutely drowning in good fights to talk about, and we're going to have Kyle McLaughlin back. Everyone loved his last appearance. He's always a delight to have on the show. And we're going to talk about some boxing, but it's going to be very inconsistent as far as our usual UFC schedule goes, and that's fine. We're going to come up with all sorts of interesting topics, and probably some topics that aren't that interesting.
And we will have the handies.
And the handies. Which, of course, I spend all year looking forward to. And then when it gets to the actual time we have to do them, I'm like, oh my god, I've forgotten the entire year. I don't remember anything. There's too many events. Anyway, this week we had, it was supposed to be Derek Lewis versus Sergey Spivak, a scintillating main event. And then it was canceled. I didn't even know that this fight was canceled until I started watching. Like it happened like the day of, right?
Yeah.
Due to non-COVID, non-weight cutting illness, they specified on Wikipedia. Okay. And so it was main evented, headlined by Kennedy and Nzechukwu versus Iwan Kutalaba, which frankly didn't really deliver all the Kutalaba-ness I want.
I think he's learned. You think he's learned sentience?
I would hate to think so.
It would be a tragedy.
There was
the kind of way that, he who makes a beast of himself, gets the pain of becoming a man. But in the inverse, I don't want Iwan Kutalaba to know the pain of what it is to be like
no
thinking person. I want him to carry on being, the admittedly much worse equivalent of who was Gilgamesh's friend in the Epic of Gilgamesh?
Enkidu, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets seduced into becoming, into basically learning what a man is.
Yep.
I don't want that to happen to Iwan Kutalaba. I want him to be gloriously stupid.
So what you're saying is
his whole career.
What you're saying is that it's possible that Iwan Kutalaba got laid for the first time.
Yeah. Has anyone checked?
Has anyone checked? Check this man's hymen. I think he might have lost his virginity, and there was a strange thing. I mean, he did look kind of like a man who had been laid for the first time in the stare down with Nzechukwu, whereas some intrepid poster on Twitter pointed out he was really nice. He wasn't mad at all. They smiled. They shook hands. He didn't look like pumped to kill. He didn't look like he was blaming Nzechukwu for presumably all the sex he wasn't having. I think he got laid. Or the other theory that I proposed at the time was terminal illness. Kutalaba has. He just found out he has MS or something. And so now he's made his peace with mortality, and that's not. Kutalaba has to drown every time he gets finished in a fight. He has to be flailing pure animal instinct to survive. A Kutalaba who knows it will all end someday, that's not a fighter I really want to see. So anyway, that happened. A couple other things happened. It wasn't an amazing card. It wasn't an amazing card going in, and it lost what could have at least been a very silly and stupid main event to cap it all off. So it was what it was. We're going to talk about the most interesting parts of it, of which there were not that many. Although it's not like it was bad, but it wasn't great. And then, Phil, you had an idea for a topic. I'm going to pitch it that way so that people who don't enjoy it know who to blame. What are we going to talk about after fight recaps?
Yeah, so I actually had someone talk to me and say, I really want to get into, I'd really like to get into MMA. All my friends are into it, but I just don't know how to start. So I thought, what would be the fights that you would tell someone to watch if they were getting into the UFC? What are the ones that you would use to hold together, or at least not even just the fights? What are the events you would get people to watch that hold the sport together? And so we did, we kind of did that, and we've almost certainly missed out some absolutely critical ones.
Oh, absolutely.
Have you ever seen or read High Fidelity?
No.
It's a very guys I think they called it Ladlit back in the day, but it's about a guy who's obsessed with pop music and top tens and constantly ranking things and all this other kind of stuff that we're very familiar with. And an attractive woman asks him for his top 5 albums of all time, or whatever it is, or songs, and then he tells them to her, and then day afterwards he realizes that his entire list was complete dog shit and it's the worst thing he's ever done, and he has to ring her up and change it all. So this is 100% going to happen. We're going to miss out some unbelievably key event.
Yeah.
And I want you to know that because he's already blamed me for the list itself, if we missed anything out, it's Connor's fault.
Yeah, well, at least we have the added believability of no attractive women asked us to do this, because we know that never happens in real life. The number of attractive women I have had,
true.
The number of attractive women I have had to force to listen to interesting lists of mine is much larger than the number who have inquired. I'll say it that way. So anyway, yeah, we're going to talk about the all-time MMA events. Not even necessarily just the best ones, but the ones I think to just give somebody the most comprehensive flavor of MMA and sort of a look through the history of the sport as we know it. But first we have to talk about the card Derek Lewis wasn't on.
Yeah. I mean, it is remarkable how much the UFC clearly has a strategy at the moment where they had a strategy back right after the first after ESPN got the broadcasting rights.
Mm-hmm.
Could clearly see that they didn't really differentiate very much in terms of the quality between ESPN cards and ESPN pay-per-views all that much, partially because ESPN guaranteed them an absurdly large amount for every pay-per-view they put on.
Right.
Now they've clearly realized that it doesn't make any sense to buff up regular cards with lots of quality fighters, because even if you can make some small incremental change, some small incremental improvement over the pay-per-view, to push it over the ESPN limit, that's much, much more profitable. And I think probably ESPN just told them to do it as well, but who knows? But anyway, the result is that fight night cards recently have been somewhat thin and vulnerable to having their main events removed and leaving them without, any clear narrative or driving force behind them. And it's happened a lot.
Yeah. I mean, a whole host of them literally have gone to the night of the event, and then still the entire card leaves a sour taste in your mouth because the main events keep ending in weird injuries and stuff too. We've had several of those where the undercard's not enough to support it, and then you spend the entire time looking forward to a main event that just sort of vanishes before your eyes.
This was actually something we discussed before the card and sort of decided against, which is that if you're trying to give someone a flavor for MMA, do you have to give them weirdness and the disappointment as well?
Yeah.
have to give them the cards that just end in something insane happening, or
and I think
that have.
I think when we get into it, maybe we should try to think of some of those, because it is an essential part of the MMA viewing experience. Sometimes the fights are sometimes they're dog shit. And sometimes they're like interesting, but in a very strange way. And so there are certain nights where 9 fighters missed weight and somebody gets a freak injury, and there's like one of those classic incredibly stupid KOs. There's certain nights that are just shot through with a kind of strangeness. It's a sport for weirdos. So I do feel like that is an essential part of it, but we did not include those under must recommend cards, because the idea is to get someone into the sport, I suppose, before fully exposing them to how strange and how bad it can be.
Yeah.
So
this week's undisclosed weirdness left us with Fight Night Zechukwu Kutalaba.
Yeah.
And Kennedy Nzechukwu looked pretty okay.
He's a solid fighter, man. He's a very solid fighter. I mean, he's obviously got his shortcomings. Like, he makes up for a lot of deficiencies on the feet by being huge. But he also pairs that with being an aggressive, swarming striker. And then, despite it not being a tremendously great look, that Kutalaba was able to take him down twice in quick succession. He has now proven in 2 fights he's an immensely capable grappler. I thought he did a great job. But by the way, is it not the perfect Kutalaba position to hang on to and try to get mad and punch from? The scarf hold resulting from a head and arm throw. Once again proving that men's light heavyweight is essentially women's bantamweight. That those takedowns literally don't happen, and those positions don't occur in any other divisions. But Nzechukwu has now started also just being a huge guy on top and crushing people, and he looks like a really solid positional grappler, to be honest. But the main story is just that I don't think Kutalaba got mad enough.
Yeah, I mean, what is Ion Kutalaba without his fury?
Yeah, he's just kind of a guy. I mean, it's not like he fought a bad fight. But he didn't make any horribly catastrophic blunders. It was really just he fought a pretty good first round, and then Nzechukwu just started crushing him with knees. And that was cool. It feels like we've been seeing a lot of brutal knees lately. There was Gutierrez Edgar. There was this. Wasn't there a knee in... There was several, I think, vicious knees in Vera Font. We've just been seeing takedowns and level changes getting brutally punished lately.
Yeah, I think in general people are just more confident off their back, or at least that they're going to be able to get back up from takedowns, and also just the modern size dynamics in the UFC are quite often quite pronounced, and it just makes sense to just lift your leg up when a small person is charging you.
Yeah. But yeah, I was impressed with Nzechukwu, as I have been for a while. I mean, I thought actually his boxing even looked a little better. He was striking off the back foot. He looked fairly defensively sound. I liked the way he was sneaking in straight punches. His footwork is not amazing, but I did like how often he took the correct small steps to line up his shots, and basically compelled Kutalaba to duck into some completely brutal knees. That's really all there is to the fight. What else happened?
I mean,
yes,
it's just in general, light heavyweight, as we've said, it's simultaneously just an extremely stupid division at the moment. But there are little glimmers of maybe it's never going to be good. I mean, it isn't any actual the standards of any of the good divisions. It's never going to get there. at least you can see some of the sort of younger or rawer fights in the division, and you can be like, oh yeah, you are actually getting somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just going to be, Devin Clark, just, raw violence and nothing else for the entirety of your career. So it's nice to see that at least you can hope for things from like Carlos Ulberg and Nzechukwu.
Mm-hmm. All right, what else we got here? We had a heavyweight fight that I don't care about. We had Muslim Salikov versus Andre Fialho, one of many Henry Hooft fighters in the UFC today, and not one I think that one of the few remaining Hooft fighters who has like been clearly mentally broken by Hooft or was already mentally broken in such a way that Hooft's sort of assertive, stentorian, stern father figure kind of thing, didn't work on him. Because Andre Fialho has now demonstrated in virtually every UFC fight a chronic issue with just having confidence in anything he can do, which is quite surprising. Maybe it's because he gets hurt a lot. I mean, he may just not have a good enough chin, and he has to worry about it. But it is surprising that he's so shaky confidence-wise, because he's a massive puncher.
Mm-hmm.
And usually those guys always know they have that to fall back on. And Fialho does not have that. He is a glass cannon both physically and mentally. And he literally just sort of dropped out of the fight with Salikov.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like
he was doing good.
An amazing finish, but it was also like one where you just found yourself thinking you're not going to do anything. Like,
no, yeah,
you might as well just call this.
Yeah, I did think it was funny that Fialho protested when the referee stepped in. It's like, buddy,
like what?
I think even it was sort of a desultory protest. He was like,
yeah, he was like, oh, come on, man,
going through the motions, but like he literally hadn't thrown a strike for like the last 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was what it was. Jack Della Maddalena.
I mean, in general, I think Salikov is pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
He's gotten like he's built up like a sort of coherent MMA style, and then just like busts out weird stuff every now and again. Like it all makes sense. It's cool.
Yeah. He's a Sanda guy. He looks like a Sanda guy. It's not very reminiscent of, say, Kung Lee's fighting style.
Yes, exactly.
Big, powerful kicks from long range, enough sort of boxing from the same distance to look sharp until you get in his face and reveal that actually, like, he doesn't really know how to box. His footwork was certainly like collapsing when Fialho was just staying on top of him. He almost never throws a combination. Also a problem that Kung Lee routinely had. Like, it's a lot of tricks, basically, Salikov style. A lot of, I'm going to move around, and if you don't know what to do, like borderline Mike Winklejohn style switch-ups. You know, I'm going to poke you with the jab, and then I'm going to do a left hook. None of these things are going to come in combination. It all just depends on you being there for the strike and you feeling that you have to make like a static defensive commitment in response to the threat.
In some ways, just a perfect style matchup for a sort of skittish one-and-done power puncher.
Yeah, exactly.
Fialho reminds me of like the nadir of Jake Ellenberger's career. Like, Jake Ellenberger had a tremendous heights to his. Or he fell off, but Fialho just seems to have just a brief sort of, oh, this guy might be, and then you just go, oh no.
Yeah. So, that was what it was. Next up on the card, I mean, we may as well just run through it and spend the rest of the show talking about good events. Jack Della Maddalena, nothing new, nothing bad. took on.
I mean, he's the story of this card, really, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
He's what you would be watching this card for. He's the future fighter that you're going to be. That is obviously going somewhere.
Yeah, he's the new Justin Gaethje in that he, as of yet, has no Wikipedia page, but is now I think 3-0, 3 KOs in the UFC. Savage body punching. I mean, the guy is not just a puncher. He is actually a really quality pressure boxer. The way that he enters exchanges is really quite slick. He uses his jab. Will often have like a half beat feint following that, trying to trigger some reaction out of the opponent. And his shot selection is fantastic. I mean, all good punchers really need to learn from what Jack Della Maddalena does. If you naturally have power, you can afford to just get up to someone and scare them with your punches. Then what you really need, and Alex Pereira from last weekend is another great example of this, are like the basics of building combinations that pose your opponent who's already afraid of your power with just multiple threats, none of which can be defended in the same way. So we're talking, the obvious example is shots that come from the left and shots that come from the right. But a less discussed dynamic, a less discussed sort of problem that Della Maddalena and Pereira both pose their opponents with is shots that come from above and shots that come from underneath. And that includes, shots to the body as well as uppercuts. But combining that with overhands, with downward hooks, getting somebody in the corner and then just putting your punches together in such a way that you're hitting multiple targets from multiple different angles vastly increases the chances of the combination doing what a combination is supposed to do, which is one punch misses or even works and helps the next one to land with even more effect. So yeah, Maddalena's combinations are really, honestly, very beautiful. He puts his punches together excellently and is incredibly difficult to deal with if, like I suspect most MMA fighters he'll fight for some time, you are kind of easily pressed back by a jab and stuck in a corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he, at least in this phase, he looks as good as anyone does in the welterweight division. And honestly, better. Like, I don't think you would be out of line if you were like, this guy is the best boxer in the welterweight division right now. I mean, it's basically him or a faded Jorge Masvidal.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think he looks a bit better than Jorge at the moment. But yeah, I mean, there's still a few questions to answer. I think they're primarily like, I think there's basically 3 questions that you probably have to look at. Like, what does he look like against southpaws where he can't work his jab? Mm-hmm. Does he look like against people who just run away from him a lot? Because we have seen, like, many occasions, like, quality boxers who are great at taking small adjustment steps and great at working in combination and have, like, he's pretty good defensively. Mm-hmm. Once they have to chase people, they suddenly become a lot more. They suddenly become a good deal wilder. Mm-hmm. How much does he work when he's got someone who won't basically agree to pocket exchanges with him? And obviously, it's welterweight. It's not GSP era welterweight, but it's still welterweight. How does he do against wrestlers?
Correct. Yeah.
So I mean, all 3 of those questions, but like super exciting ones to answer. He looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you said, it was sort of what everyone expected to happen. I mean, I feel bad for Danny Roberts. He seems like a fun guy who was just set up as a sacrifice.
Yeah.
I think it's time to, if you want to rush him, then rush him. But other than that, start giving him those kind of tests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's 26. Like, He may have the nose of a 58-year-old man who has been in 3,000 barroom brawls, but he's young.
There's some Dan Henderson in his creator character.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah. Yeah. He also distinctly has the impression of having been carved. Just looks like somebody that would not feel particularly human to like touch his shoulder. Like, oh, did I just touch a piece of furniture, or what was that? Yeah, I say test him. I mean, like, he has the feeling of a super experienced fighter, but as you said, those are in very specifically kind of forgiving matchups where he just gets to play his game. So we need to see him sort of see some development. How does he handle different style matchups? And it's not just I'm also curious about how he deals with somebody who really wants to pressure him. That's the other thing I want to see. Always my question about aggressive punchers is, how do they do when somebody just isn't scared and stands their ground and even puts them on the back foot? So, things to find out. 2023, I suspect, will be a very good year for Jack Della Maddalena.
I mean, I think basically they... think it's the kind of thing you give him, like, Rodriguez for a fight night main event.
Daniel Rodriguez?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or, that's say, how good are you? Rodriguez is the other person as a modern MMA fighter who can have a claim as just like an extremely competent pocket operator.
Yep.
That's just like, are you actually the best in the division at what you do kind of thing? Give him Chiesa as like, Chiesa or Brady as just a really hard test of, are you ready for the top? You give him like Luque as a potentially faded guy that he could possibly beat up to jump him higher than any of the others.
Ultimately, you give him Neil Magny.
You give him Neil Magny?
To find out if he's good. That's basically what Neil Magny does. Are you really good? Because it certainly seems like...
That is the true, like, real dangerous test.
Yeah. It certainly seems like he could just go in there and just blast Neil Magny's ribcage to bits, right?
Yes. Also, like...
It's always a question.
Other fighters will take your health.
Yeah.
Or, like, your ranking. Whatever. But Neil Magny will take your self-respect.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
You'll take it into the Neil Magny clinch vortex.
Yep.
You'll never feel quite the same again.
Yep. All right. I think that's pretty much everything worth touching on. I mean, there was honestly a really, really good fight between Zhalgas Zhumagulov and Charles Johnson. It was an awesome fight. I mean, way more of a war than I expected. It depresses me, though, because I thought it was a really bad decision that Charles Johnson somehow won when Zhumagulov spent, the better part of 2 rounds just blasting his body and hitting him with huge punches. And then it depressed me because Zhumagulov, this is a guy who he retired after that.
Yeah, because he'd lost 5 of his last 6 fights.
Yeah, which sucks because despite these results, he's pretty clearly been like getting better over the course of his UFC career. He's still capable of. This is a 34-year-old fighter who was a long-time regional champion. Beat guys like Tyson Am and Ali Bagotinov, and essentially came to the UFC and had to reconfigure his game. It's a Will Brooks thing, I think. He basically became a champion really early and got used to the sort of defensive, flummoxing, long fight style. And then he came to the UFC and his output just wasn't high enough. He just wasn't aggressive enough. And the people were generally too good for him to just routinely win rounds, assuming they would fight at his pace. And this was like, he looked good against Jeff Molina. I thought he might have won that fight too. And then he looked even better. And this one, he looked honestly phenomenal. Best I've ever seen him. And then, like reaching new heights, somehow gets robbed and then retires is a bummer.
Also, like a ton of brutal fouls.
Oh my God. Absolutely disgustingly full of fouls. There were...
And he landed one, like, real solid knee to the gut.
One that I'm pretty sure was revenge.
Yeah.
Because Johnson had poked him in the eye. Well, first he got him with the tape, which was stopped, and then he genuinely got him with a deep eye poke that the referee, having presumably seen that the earlier one was not actually a foul, just disregarded.
Mm.
And then he got hit low. And then finally he got Johnson in the clinch and got Johnson in the Johnson. He just kneed him.
Then he got fouled again in like the last round.
Yeah.
This fight was like, fight took like 25 minutes due to the fouls.
Yeah, but it was really good for all that. It was just one of those fights that was so wild and combative. It was like a Willie Pep, Sandy Sadler kind of thing. Like, it was full of fouls because they were really both going for it and fighting tooth and nail. Literally, nail.
Yeah. Yeah, it was constantly, I felt really bad for Magulov because he was just constantly... It reminded me a little of, like, Melendez Masvidal as well. It was just like him just constantly chasing down a big tall guy who just wanted his chance to land like clean straight punches on the little guy, but just being given very little opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. I said after watching it that he used to look like Francisco Trinaldo on a bad night, but now he looks like Francisco Trinaldo on a good night. Which, as we know, is quite the spectrum. That's a serious transformation. So, yeah. Anyway, that's about it. Maya Moroz was solid. Jennifer Maya actually, seems that she's kind of adding to her boxing. She looked faster, but she also just looked a little more considered. It wasn't just 1-2s, for one thing, which is honestly a massive development for her. She was in there throwing 4-punch combinations. She was using the jab on its own way more effectively in a largely, or at least for long periods, a back foot performance, as Moroz was driven to just pressure her because she kept getting hit super clean. I thought she was going to knock Moroz out. It's honestly the most dangerous I've ever seen Jennifer Maya look with her hands. So that was kind of awesome too. It's fun when a fighter that you've just kind of written off as being like fully and easily understood just suddenly shows up with some new wrinkles. Jennifer Maya getting better suddenly makes me interested in her as a fighter. So
yeah, I mean, she's not exactly young, but she's still got a tremendous amount of physical potential.
She's a very
one
good
of
athlete.
the only people to have put Valentina Shevchenko in any kind of trouble.
Yep.
And expect her to do it again, but yeah, it's nice to see her taking a considered approach.
Yeah, you see her like that, and you see her in this fight, and it's like maybe you could run back the Chukagian matchup and win it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a significant improvement for her, and probably she's wants to earn her way back to another title shot, and be hard not to give it to her if she continues to win and continues to look like this. I mean, who the hell else is there?
She has to fight Andrade at some point, though.
True.
It has to be done.
And that's actually, especially after this performance, I think that's quite an interesting fight.
Yeah, in some ways, I would favor. Ways, I would favor Maya because Andrade is not equipped to wrestle with people who are as strong as her.
Strong and actually a reasonably skilled wrestler. Yeah, I think that's a fight night main event right there. A solid one. Okay. Well, that's it. I mean, 36 minutes. That's far too long to spend on this card. We've spent as long talking about this card as Charles Johnson versus Zhalgas Zhumagulov took to, reach the final bell. So let's take a break. When we come back, our topic for the day, which I will remind you is Phil's fault, is our top 11? I can't recall what number we landed on.
I think we're up to 12 now.
Our top several MMA events to introduce your not yet depraved enough friends to the wild world of mixed martial arts after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are going to start sort of raggedly running through our list here. This will be fun. I mean, we are, by definition, revisiting some of the best, most interesting nights of fights that this sport has ever produced. And there's only one place to start, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
It is the 1974 bout between Muhammad Ali and Antonio Inoki. Truly a great fight that must be seen to be believed. That fight is essentially like half an hour straight of people playing the fingertip game in modern MMA. No, the place to start is UFC 1, which is, frankly, a disgusting event, which should have seen the sport banned forever. Because it is just... It really... I mean, I think you really should start there. Because not only does it get you into one of the fundamental Mortal Kombat-style questions at the heart of MMA, which is, which style is best? An element that, even though almost everyone is now some kind of MMA native, has still not gone away. It's still a question that gets asked regularly just in matchups because people specialize still. The best fighters are still specialists. So that to me is really, really important to understand if you're going to find out if you are not cut out to be an MMA fan. And then the other thing is that it's incredibly seedy and like greasy and like dimly lit and like it's a freak show. It's just a horrible cast of misfits, all just being fed to Hoist Gracie for the purposes of like dynastic propaganda. It is the whole thing is like morally questionable.
Yeah,
in a way that even modern MMA has sort of at least buried that element under a professional sheen. But that's really what MMA is
I think
about.
modern MMA has a reputation for being brutal, but it's sort of lost the element, the idea that it's sort of vaguely disgusting.
Yes.
It doesn't have the sort of into the Thunderdome kind of seediness, that UFC 1 has, and just the sheer like shocking lack of like professionalism or like the wildly different levels of athleticism between the fighters involved, some of which have zero of it, the total lack of weight classes, Bill Wallace's absolutely baffled commentary, the idea that everyone present was just winging it to some massive extent.
Bill, is it the first event in which Bill Wallace burps during?
Yes, he just belches really loudly at some point, like really early on,
during,
like introduce you to the event.
Yes, the introduction to the card. A probably drunk Bill Wallace just can't even get through the first cue card without burping.
Yeah, I mean, but it also like it just ties it to the actual world as well.
Absolutely,
because the people that you're watching are recognizably just sort of regular people in some way that modern athletes sort of aren't.
Right.
They don't know what's going on either. So yeah, you kind of have to start there,
including Hoist Gracie, the man. The entire event was essentially structured to favor. That was the idea. And Hoist Gracie is like bad. He's like not athletic. I mean, this is I'm not sure how often you see it on this particular card, but the sooner you're introduced to the Gracie stomp, the better, I think. You need to understand this, because this is still a joy of MMA, is that certain fighters to this day reach astronomically high levels while being comically bad at like one of the three phases, at least one.
Mm-hmm.
And in Hoist Gracie's day, I mean, this was the birth of a long and still healthy tradition of fighters who need the fight to be on the ground to have a good chance of winning and can't get it there unless the opponent has no idea what they're doing or literally pushes them over themselves. Yeah, it's a great foundation to understand, really how gross MMA is. If you can stomach UFC 1, you're going to like many of the other fights we're going to recommend. Like before you even think of looking at Rory McDonald, Robbie Lawler 2, you need to see Gerard Gordeau like get mad that the referee stopped him from kicking out even more of Tyler Tully's teeth.
Yeah, he's already not one of Tyler Tully's teeth is already embedded in Gordeau's foot, and he still wants to kick him in the head some more. It is vile and disgusting.
It's gross.
Yeah, and after that, you skip a whole bunch of stuff.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of historically significant things you should watch, and a lot of meaningful events. You know, the rise of Shamrock and Mark Coleman and Matt Smith, and there's just like so many things that you can that like we're gonna just skip past, because I think what you really need that first UFC event for is that feeling of what it was like.
Yeah.
And once you have that feeling of what it was like and what you understand, and you understand it, you've seen it once, you can sort of let it go, because it doesn't represent much of the modern MMA world at all. But you have to know that it's there. You have to know that that is what everything else was built on.
Yeah, and MMA kind of took a while to like get better. There are some real legendary stinkers in those first UFC events. It was before they were still operating under a worse version of the bare knuckle boxing rule idea, where like the fight can't end until somebody gets finished, which presupposes that the fighters are capable of finishing each other, which was not always the case. So, yeah. But anyway, it's gross. That's why you should watch it. And next, we jump forward all the way to 2003. We cover a span of 10 years to get to our next event, which is Pride 25. Now, Phil, you insisted on this because it has Fedor.
Yes.
And if you're going to get into MMA, by the way, you have to mispronounce it. It is technically pronounced Fyodor, but we all say Fedor. It's too embedded now to stop. It has Fedor versus Big Nog. It is not. I think if I could pick one fight to jump forward to from UFC 1, where, of course, again, you watch Hoist Gracie just being fed a bunch of easy wins, then Fedor Big Nog 1 is a really natural continuation. Because that shows the huge growth in just the quality of skills that MMA fighters have, and that somebody falling down on their back and being able to finish you from there is not nearly enough to beat the best of the best anymore. But hey, you wanted the one where Big Nog used his boxing.
A minute. Surely this is the first. This is, Anthony, this is a first fight, is it not?
I don't
Oh,
think
no.
it is. Yeah.
Is it?
Oh, maybe. Oh my God, it is. You picked the right one. You changed it.
Yes.
Oh, beautiful.
Did pick the right one.
Then everything I just said applies.
Yeah, because this was the one where Big Nog was considered to be the sort of unstoppable, the unstoppable champion, but Emelianenko was seen as this, terrifying Iceman, and it was going to be this, this clash of styles. And as you said, the rationale was still at this point. I mean, in some ways, you could really point to this as being this fight more so even than some of the. This was, I think, earlier on, back in the Shamrock and Coleman era, people that was the first hammers into the idea of the Guard as a viable long-term winning strategy.
Yeah.
This was, I think, perhaps the last nail.
Yeah, I think that's more than fair. I mean, the irony, I guess, of the UFC and its instrumental role in creating this sport, or at least, continuing to develop the early ideas of this sport, being essentially an advertisement for the idea of guard grappling. Like, that was the selling point, is that Hoist Gracie kept getting these, like, bigger, stronger, meaner-looking dudes, like, on top of him and finishing them anyway. And nobody really had considered that that was a viable way of fighting. And it turned out that everyone was right. Because once the sport developed, we have now been in the guard fighting is bad and will never carry you to high-level success phase, basically, since Fedor Big Nog won.
Yeah. Also, we wanted to say events rather than fights because that's how MMA is presented, and also because people do, best fights in MMA kind of lists all the time.
Mm-hmm.
This has a tremendous, as many like Pride events did, like just a tremendous list of fighters that people should know about.
Yeah.
You've got Quinton Jackson in his kind of violent and athletic prime. It's got Kevin Randleman, who was one of the best athletes to ever grace MMA.
Yep.
Who was just, both fairly untrained and tiny for his weight class.
Yep. That was
Would have been
an
absolutely monstrous modern. I don't know what even would he have been. Would he have been like a welterweight?
Oh, that's disturbing to imagine.
Maybe not. He's
There's no way.
too much in his.
He's too dense.
No, he would have been a middleweight, I think.
Yeah, and he would have been a great middleweight.
Mm-hmm.
Guy who's just a huge athletic freak. That is totally a viable archetype at 185. Yeah. Now,
Yep.
to the event that you initially wanted to add, I will give an honorable mention because I think that's Pride Shockwave 2004, which did have
Possibly a better,
It's a better card,
event, to be honest. In all honesty, but
it's a better card. But frankly, there's plenty of weirdness on all the 2000s era Pride events. All the undercard is going to have a bunch of just strange matchups that don't seem to make any sense to you as a presumably English-speaking Western viewer, but maybe not. And but you have to see the Guard getting thrashed by Fedor. It's a incredibly memorable, mesmerizing, brutal performance. If you just want to watch a really good Pride card, though, watch Pride Shockwave 2004 after that. Because I had Fedor Big Nog 3. I had Mark Hunt Vanderlei Silva, which is both a ridiculously stupid freak show fight and just an awesome fight. It had Takanori Gomi wrecking Jens Pulver. It had Crow Cop guillotining the aforementioned Kevin Randleman. And it also had the infamous heel hook finish of Anderson Silva by Ryo Chonin, which is also just a finish that, as a non-MMA fan, you're going to love because you've never seen anything like that. Somebody with a flying scissor sweep takedown immediately into a heel hook. You're going to watch the replay several times in mystification. All right, so what's next, Phil?
we haven't actually finished saying all the people who were on 25 Body Blow.
Oh, okay. Who else?
It also had Dan Henderson knocking out Shungo Oyama.
Oh,
Had
yeah.
Anderson Silva, the future middleweight champion of the
I
UFC,
just said
knocking
Anderson's.
out Carlos Newton, the future
That was
welterweight
on
champion
the
of the UFC.
That was on the 2003 card. I forgot. Wow.
And it had a really sad KO of Kazushi Sakuraba, who was obviously a pioneer who spent much of the Pride run being brutally sacrificed to its current era of stars.
Sort of became the Simpsons of MMA fighters, where by the end of its career, way more of it had been spent past its prime and just being beaten up than there was actually looking good. Something else you should familiarize yourself, don't you think, as a burgeoning MMA fan, is the feeling of crushing sadness when you watch an old man get murdered.
Or you just learn to enjoy it.
Yeah, if you're Phil's friend who prompted this topic, you're going to have a great time watching Body Blow Pride 25. Okay, next event.
So it was Pride 33.
This is one of my favorite events of all time.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pure enjoyment. So we've tried to go for like things which are either have a mixture of relevance and just awesomeness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is just a tremendous event from like essentially from top to bottom. It's just really, really good the whole way through.
Yeah.
I mean, it starts off with Team Hellboy Hansen getting a finish, one of the best action fighters of all time.
Absolutely.
It's got Sergei Kharitonov. It's got Frank Trigg really sadly beating Kazuo Mizaki, but you got to have one of these things. It's got the absolutely freakish Ramo Thierry Sokoju upset of Lil Nog, which just ends up being one of these like really salutary stories about the power of power of variance in MMA, and how people can put like a few good performances together, and you can genuinely think this person's going to be something, and they won't be.
So many promising prospects over the course of the history of MMA have you look back at them and they are just blips. And Sokoju almost seems like the perfect example of that.
Sokoju and Houston Alexander were two where you were like, man, this guy's really got it, and then almost immediately the answer was like, no, he ain't got it.
Yeah.
Hayato Mac Sakurai beating Mac Danzig, Mauricio Shogun Hua knocking out Alistair Overeem
again, I believe.
Takanori, Diaz Gomi, Henderson Silva, delay. Like it is sensational action and incredibly relevant fighters who would go on to put their mark on the sport in one way or another, just like top to bottom.
Yeah, Nick Diaz Takanori Gomi alone is a fight that would carry a lot of much weaker cards as a recommendation. I mean, it's legendary. It has an insane submission you or your uninitiated friend will have never imagined was possible. It has, I mean, just only one, but a massive momentum shift. Actually, there are a couple little swings for Gomi after the big momentum shift where he drops Nick Diaz. And then I guess the moment when he takes him down is very exciting until you realize that actually it's his death. And then of course, you just have to have the added context to know that Nick Diaz, I don't even know if this is apocryphal, if this is just legend or if it's true, but the story that I choose to believe is that Nick Diaz literally smoked a blunt in the locker room because that's how high his test levels for marijuana metabolites were. That they were like, this all happened while he was stoned. And Nick Diaz is such an essential character in MMA history. And then, of course, Hendo KOing Silva. I just love that fight. And Hendo is one of those fighters I actually just genuinely love. Who's a guy like that for you, Phil? Who's like a historic fighter that maybe doesn't even seem like they should be your usual type, but you just like them?
I don't know. I can't think of it off the top of my head. I mean, there's a lot of guys that I got into when I first got into the sport. But would people expect me to really like Big Nog? No.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's just a sensational event, just worth watching from start to finish. And yeah, I think I remember it also led to some of the first memorable Diaz-isms, him saying that Gomi hit him with a fucking fireball or something.
Yeah,
Hadouken. Sorry,
with a Hadouken. Yes.
Shogun Hua in his physical prime.
Yep.
Which didn't last for very long.
No, it didn't. But you deserve to see 2005, 2008 era Shogun Hua. For sure.
And Alistair Overeem looking much smaller than he would later.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Next up, then, we have UFC 47.
It's on.
What's that? It's on?
That's what it was called. It's on. Back when they had awesome, terrible names.
I wish they still
nice.
titles the events. I really do. I think it's fun because you get to see the organization sort of run out of ideas. It happens to every single org that names their events. Like the ONE FC events are all named like lyrics from a Dragon Force song.
Yeah.
Like Wings of Fury, Warriors of Heaven. They all sound like dime store fantasy novels. Anyway, it's on.
Everyone should have their opportunities, but also like you can just make sequels to them. You can be like, it's on too.
They do that. ONE FC has had like 19 Glory of Heroes events at this point. Yeah, I think It's On is an appropriately sort of creatively bankrupt title for the UFC. It's not really interesting. It kind of sucks as a title. It's perfect for an event headlined by Chuck Liddell absolutely destroying Tito Ortiz.
Very funny fight.
Very, very funny fight. Chuck Liddell destroying Tito Ortiz for the first time as well, and setting the tone for their whole rivalry, such as it was, which was really just...
Yeah, so this one I think is to kind of... I think we picked it for significance because, you need something from that era of the UFC, the Chuck and the Tito era, and also because, you need to recognize some of the main, strengths of that era, which is, it's unintentionally funny. So it has, Tiki Ghosten getting finished, which is always entertaining by Bulldog Choke. Yeah. As I said, it has Tito getting annihilated. It has Andrei Arlovsky proving that, at his best, he was still one of the he's still one of the biggest punchers ever in MMA. He's knocked out a bunch of people.
Yeah,
he knocked out a bunch of people who would either not be knocked out very much before, or who hadn't been knocked out very much before or after that. He KO'd Rothwell and Big Country when they were young and in their prime, and he also knocked out Cabbage Correa here.
Yeah, whose literally only talent was his chin.
Yes. It has Nick Diaz defeating Robbie Lawler, another historic performance.
Yep, and a great fight. Like most Nick Diaz fights, just a thrill to watch.
Yeah, but also one which tells you a bit about the narratives of MMA and how you never quite know when they're done. Because Lawler was really MMA's first super prospect.
Yep.
First one where people were just like, this guy is going to run the sport. He's athletic in a way which people just aren't. He's powerful. He loves to fight. He's brutal. Yep. He's technical. He's there's no way he's not going to run this game.
He's a total.
And then
Chad.
he gets knocked out by a shit talking lanky jiu-jitsu guy.
Yep.
And then just gets lost in the wilderness for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And then comes back and gets the UFC title anyway, and fulfills all that promise at the last minute.
Yeah, I believe it was also an early example of a. And if you're going to get familiar with MMA and the UFC in particular, you're going to have to get familiar with Joe Rogan. Sorry. I guess it's also an early example of Joe Rogan not really knowing what's going on with the fighters, clinging to certain narratives in the short term and not picking up on longer term ones over the course of fighters' careers, because he is particularly flummoxed that Nick Diaz has the gall to box with Robbie Lawler, but Nick had actually been showing improving striking, and he had 2 fights with Jeremy Jackson before that, where yes, he was the grappler, but he also was out there flexing and offering his chin and landing jabs and showing early signs of the fighter he would be known to become. And Joe Rogan didn't know. But it is fun to watch his amazement that Nick Diaz.
Yeah, that is something you will also learn from watching later on in the UFC, yes. Joe Rogan getting locked in, then having his mind blown.
Yeah, I mean, I do like it too. I complain about it, but also it's just part of the flavor at this point.
Yeah. And also it had the curtain jerker of Genki Sudo defeating Mike Brown. And Genki Sudo is a super weird and pretty fun addition to MMA, honestly. Some people really hate him because they find him to be too carny, but I don't think you can be too carny in MMA.
No, I saw some people actually getting defensive very recently about an assertion from like a pro wrestling fan that MMA wouldn't exist in its current form without pro wrestling. They were getting all defensive, and like that's just undeniably true. Like it owes so much. Its origins in Japan. Literally, I mean, Kazushi Sakuraba won a UFC Grand Prix, a UFC tournament, and his first words at the end were, "Pro wrestling is strong." He wanted to show that pro wrestling is strong. I mean, it's pro wrestling. It's in its blood. And Genki Sudo is a great pro wrestling style character for MMA.
Absolutely.
Okay, what do you say we take a break? When we come back, I mean, this is somehow going to be us just recollecting favorite events. Is going to be long. We're going to have to pick someone to skim over because there's some really, really good ones yet to come. But when we come back, we've got Affliction, Day of Reckoning. We've got some Jose Aldo fights. We've got a Khabib fight card that Phil insisted on having in there. Again, all of this is Phil's fault. There's lots of good stuff coming up after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's keep moving. Affliction, Day of Reckoning. Why this, Phil?
Because it represents a certain point in the clash between Pride and UFC, and also because it was a point where their fighters would actually like be matched up against each other. It wasn't the first or like the most significant point. It was also the fact where it was one of those points where like people felt that there were enough niches in the marketplace that like a clothing company could go and put on events with like top tier MMA stars. And as it turned out, it overpaid them a shit ton, and no, it couldn't, and it fell apart almost immediately. But just as an insane curiosity and the idea of like a non-UFC dominated world, it was one of the last gasps. We'll talk about some of the other last gasps, but it was like in the new metal era, it was unique, and I think it was really characterized in the like some of what would happen in the clash between the two organizations in the main event, where Andrei Arlovsky fought Fedor Emelianenko and got absolutely splattered.
Yeah, it's a thing that's routinely happened to the UFC. In the end, it's continued to happen, but they've sort of changed the narrative on it. But the thing where UFC fighters like go overseas or fight in some other promotion against some other champion and just get smoked.
It was Chuck getting thrashed by Rampage, I think, the first time that happened.
Yep.
And he made Dana incredibly mad.
Yep.
And yeah, it would just kind of continued all the way up until Rampage came to the UFC and won the light heavyweight belt as well.
Yeah, and I guess the fix they found for it is more of the when Tim Sylvia also went to Affliction, the sort of like wait till the guy is completely washed before you even think of letting him go. That way you can say that actually him starting to lose proves that you let him go at the right time, and it is not indicative of the level of talent in the UFC.
So yeah, it's an important one for that one.
Yeah, and a great event. It's just really fun.
Yeah, it's just it's tons of finishes, tons of weird fighters.
Big spectacle feel too. I mean, it really feels like a huge event.
Yeah, mostly big man fighters, but big man fighters were like in some ways what you got back in the day, and there wasn't the vast gulf between them and the smaller ones that there is nowadays.
Yeah, and at least they were like actually finishing each other on this card, which is what they're good for.
So next up we had UFC 94, which is
GSP versus BJ Penn 3? 2.
Twice.
Right.
So this is kind of, I think the first sort of modern era card, would you say? It's not necessarily like the modern era, but
yeah, no,
this was
I
when
think
it was becoming.
Yeah.
This was when we will. Okay, this is the beginning of the athlete era.
Absolutely.
MMA, I think that's probably the best thing to say.
Yeah.
And this is the most illustrated in the main event, where ESP with kind of an absolute focus on discipline and preparation, and physical training and game planning and all the other things which characterize a like modern elite fighter, absolutely takes apart BJ Penn, who's just like, I'm really talented and I'm probably going to win this, and is a fantastic representation of like the older like generation of MMA.
Yeah, I think GSP should serve, if you were to watch these in order, the appearance of GSP should serve as a nice shock to your system that like, oh, this is a sport now. This guy's like a professional athlete. Like, he takes his health and fitness extremely seriously. As you said, he takes his preparation and game planning extremely seriously. His marks are physicality and discipline. And, those are the things you expect out of like genuinely high-level competitors in basically any international sport. And GSP is one of the first guys. I mean, you've seen a lot of freak show shit up to this point, basically. And then GSP is just like, I mean, also just his affect. Like, he could easily be like a internationally famous hockey player or something, where he's just got this charming, nice guy, clean, polished exterior to him. It's also got Lyoto Machida in one of my favorite finishes of his entire career. This is basically right in the midst of the Machida era, or just, I guess, was the era just technically when he was champion?
Yeah, I mean, that was when they said welcome to the Machida era, so it lasted for one fight.
Yeah, okay. But you've got Machida finishing Thiago Silva with 0 time remaining in the first round after a classically very cool Machida trip takedown from the clinch. And then just a dope-ass diving karate kill shot. You've got John Jones versus Stephan Bonner. Where you
another kind of harbinger of the future.
Absolutely.
As you just watch a tough fighter in more ways than one from earlier on in the organization's history, just being thrown around like a rag doll.
Yeah. So definitely, this is a good benchmark for the growth of the sport. Next up, we have UFC 100, which I'm pretty sure we did a special commentary of ages ago with, or maybe I just did it with Mookie Alexander. Did you do that as well?
Don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm old.
Somewhere there's like a Heavy Hands band camp where you can probably still find that. So go check that out. We watched the whole of main card back and commented on each of the fights as they played out. Yeah, Phil, why don't you introduce us to the fights?
So this is the first great peak of the UFC, I think. This is when it really started to hit the mainstream, and people really started to care about it. And suddenly money was just flowing into the organization. The idea that the sport was going to, the whole, every cards before this have tended to be characterized by sort of a weird kind of underground insecurity of like, this is going to fall apart at any minute. This is suddenly at the point where just money is flooding in.
Yeah.
And, big guys who have been the anchor of the company for so long are actually getting to be like athletic and cool. And, it's I think, They were just about to kick off the Fox deal. It had a massive pay-per-view, and earned tons of pay-per-views, and they were able to put out a roster of stars to just and an incredible top to bottom card.
Yeah.
So at the top, Brock Lesnar beating Frank Mir. Lesnar, as someone who had never quite fitted in pro wrestling, was a giant physical freak, and who climatized to MMA with shocking speed.
And proved that, once again, it is still just pro wrestling.
Yeah.
Doing pro wrestling promos, getting on top of his wife, all that business. And making Frank Mir eat the strawberries, or catching him in the act of stealing them. I can't remember how the meme went, but...
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's a healthy mix,
GSP.
this card. It really is.
Yeah. GSP fighting someone people genuinely thought there was a really strong chance he could lose.
Yep.
Someone who could stop takedowns and low kick him, and just a physical savage in Thiago Alves, and just dismantling him.
Yep.
Dan Henderson with one of the most iconic KOs of all time.
Yep.
John Fitch, okay, fine. And Yoshihiro Akiyama kind of robbing Alan Belcher.
Yeah. It falls off a little bit, but you've also got an appearance of John Jones on the prelims.
Once again, yes, and still looking utterly unstoppable.
Yep, looking like...
Not unstoppable.
So yeah, there's plenty of good stuff on there. You also have... is this the last... Oh god, don't tell me that Mark Coleman's last UFC fight happened after this. Was the Shogun fight after this?
I'm sure it was, yeah. Shogun fight was a long time after.
No.
He fought Randy Couture, didn't he? Some really late point. Yeah, Randy Couture was his last fight. 2010.
Oh my god. But the Shogun fight was just before this.
Oh, okay.
And that is one of the most just depressingly horrible fights of another legend's career. Again, something you have to get used to. So he's on this card fighting Stephan Bonner. I don't remember it. I'm sure it kind of rocked and kind of sucked ass.
I mean, it's just like Stephan Bonner being completely unable to wrestle, and they both get super gassed. It's quite funny, to be honest.
Okay. So yeah, a healthy bit of everything. A full balanced meal. Next up, it's time you learned, nascent MMA fan, a valuable lesson, which is that all the good fighters are actually really small.
Hey.
Everyone above a certain weight, that weight being 155, arguably 170, sucks at fighting, actually. And so it's time for WEC 48. One of the greatest events, I think, of all time. Just unequivocally. It is just top to bottom, fantastic barn burners, crazy scrambles, which is what you get out of Little Fighters, lots of finishes, and it has Jose Aldo on it. Jose Aldo in one of, again, if GSP was a shock to your system, then Jose just carving up, effortlessly destroying a well-loved and very high-level and similarly athletic fighter in Uriah Faber is something you have to see. That's a new level of striking for what you've been exposed to so far.
WEC was, in general, an incredibly high-end promotion, as we might have said before. Possibly isn't an MMA promotion which has WEC's sheer level of quality. I mean, particularly after it sort of jettisoned its higher weight divisions and they just got folded into the UFC.
Yep.
At this point, it is just pure goodness from event to event, and this is probably the best one they've ever done.
Yeah.
Ben Henderson against Donald Cerrone was perhaps a little bit of a letdown, but it's still very exciting. Manvel Gamburian knocking out Mike Brown was super depressing, but it was also exciting.
Yep.
Shane Roller, underrated wrestle boxer from back in the day. But also, we have Anthony Pettis over here on the prelims. We have Demetrius Johnson over here on the prelims.
Yeah.
I mean, it is you also have like, long running journeymen like Takei Mitsugaki and Rani Yaya. Like it's just fantastic, and it's studded with relevance, and it's a thriller.
And I think the other one to recommend, because we don't have it on our list, but just honorable mention to WEC 53, the last WEC event.
Yes.
Anthony
Also
Pettis,
tremendous.
Ben Henderson. I mean, just for one of the most iconic things, a type of thing that still must be like instrumental to MMA's continuing popularity. That just like sometimes action movie shit happens in a fight. Stuff that should not really be possible in like a fight between actual humans happens in that main event. You deserve to see it. But it's also got another legend, Dominic Cruz versus Scott Jorgensen. Yes, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, like, this was the event that WEC was going to go out on.
Yeah.
And, as it always did, it rose to the occasion and was just like, we're going to give you one of the best fights and one of the best moments to cap it all off with, right at the top of just a stellar card.
Yeah. So next up, Strikeforce, Diaz versus Daly. Is it just a great fight? Or is it a good
It is
card?
that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had to put some Strikeforce in here.
Yeah.
Another, this is the point at which the UFC's monopoly on the market is clear.
Yeah.
There is no real conception that Strikeforce can outright compete with the UFC at this point. But it is a strong second place, and that Diaz-Daly fight is one of the craziest single rounds of fighting you're ever going to see.
Yeah.
It also has Gilbert Melendez at his peak.
Yeah, and one of my favorite performances of his, just effortlessly stuffing takedowns from Tatsuya Kawajiri, beating him up on the feet, and then crushing him on the ground. After GSP Penn, too. This is probably the best ground and pound you will have seen on this journey so far. Another thing that, get used to seeing in MMA. I think that's the thing that still freaks a lot of non-fans out, is people getting punched on their backs. But that is the MMA skill set. The one that pretty much no other sports have. So, yep. Gegard Mousasi versus Keith Jardine.
A brutal thrashing, which somehow Keith escapes with a draw.
Yep.
Shinya Aoki getting a funny submission over someone as well. Shinya Aoki is one of MMA's perhaps my personal favorite heel in MMA.
Yeah, just a vile person, really.
Yeah, but I also sort of like him.
Yeah, me too.
He's so evil.
Yeah, me too. He's like literally a villain in his daily life. And
he's just has so much like cackling, vile energy that you have to just sort of be like, I do appreciate having you around.
I think there's also there's something particularly evil about like full on cranking submission fighters. That always turns people off. Polaris, anytime somebody like holds onto a submission too long or goes for it too hard, if they do that routinely, you just kind of start to, it feels too much like torture. And Aoki is a guy who like would just like grab a standing arm lock and just wrench a dude's arm off, basically. Like he was just...
Yeah, he did that to Hirota.
Yeah.
Particularly brutal finish where he was just like, I know this guy's pride won't let him tap, so I'm just going to break it.
And then flipped him off and screamed in his face as he was sitting there nursing his broken arm.
Yeah. Also burst into tears whenever things went wrong. Tremendous.
Shinya Aoki. Yeah. Okay, next up then. UFC 189. Tell me about it.
A strong candidate for the best UFC card ever.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah, it might be.
That main card is both non-stop action, but also just different stuff.
The
Maybe
heights.
Of all the...
Yeah.
Maybe of all the cards, this might be the one where you just show someone this main card.
Yep.
You're like, do you like this? It's horrifying, isn't it? But it's also very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Just all-time action fighters on prospects, and I mean, this is the UFC at its absolute peak. or at least it's about to reach its absolute peak, I think, in
Right.
terms of the stars it can bring to the table. Rousey is just kind of spinning up. McGregor is reaching like the heights that he will reach.
He wins the interim title here.
And for this card, admittedly, this was supposed to be Aldo in the main event against McGregor, but even without that, we're just like, this card has to be the biggest and best thing we can put on. What can we do? And they put out this, and it is sensational.
You didn't even mention Robbie Lawler, Rory McDonald, too.
Yeah.
Certainly the greatest
all the way
fight of all
up
time.
to it.
Yeah.
All the way up through that main card. Thomas Almeida, Brad Pickett. Just an insanely violent war.
Yep.
Anna Nelson, Brandon Thatch. I mean, if nothing else, you get this kind of visual image of this karateka just submitting this giant, like slightly baffled kickboxer. Jeremy Stevens, Dennis Bermudez, another insanely violent fight that finishes with a brutal flying knee.
Yeah, ridiculous fight.
And then Lawler McDonald. We've spoken about it so much. Perhaps our favorite fight, I guess, is the right word for it.
It's the one that's so good and is so. It's like the come and see of MMA fights for me. Like, it's powerful, but honestly, it does make me uncomfortable to watch it because, like,
yes.
It is a fight where you see a person literally reach their breaking point. I know we've talked about this before, but you see a heroic performance end in like this like pitiful whimper.
Yes.
Which is, you won't forget it. And it's also just all around one of the best fights ever. I mean, it is the best fight ever. It's completely interesting. Even in the feeling out phase, everything is fascinating and violent and awesome.
Then McGregor Mendes, it's this is you can feel the excitement hitting fever pitch in every way. The sport itself, the fight itself. I mean, of the terrible person that McGregor has become, can never take away from the courage of this performance, the fact that he was training for a completely different fighter in Jose Aldo.
Yep.
And then went out there and was like, no, I'll fight Chad Mendes. I don't care. He didn't have to do that. He was the A side and everyone knew it. He took this fight anyway. Everyone said he'd been protected from wrestlers. He fought a wrestler. He lost. He was losing pretty badly. And then he came back and knocked him out. I mean, it was an amazing moment, whether you like Conor McGregor or don't. And even at the time, I didn't.
No.
You couldn't deny what a sensational moment this was.
Yeah. Just seeing a guy who knew and had yet to be proven wrong that he was not going to lose, that he could not lose. Pretty crazy. Also, they had live musician walkouts.
Yeah.
Which has never happened again.
Yeah, and it was cool.
It was awesome.
It was really awesome. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't like, oh my god, it's Stained. I'm so hyped. But on the other hand, I kind of was, because I was just like, this feels like a real moment.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the biggest spectacle feelings the UFC has ever managed to provide. Something they rarely go for, to be honest. Yeah, amazing. Okay, next up, we're continuing the Conor McGregor journey. And unfortunately, just because the strength of the card underneath it doesn't hold up, this is not his loss to Nate Diaz. This is his rematch. The loss to Nate Diaz, to me, is a moment, just the one fight that you have to watch. I've rewatched that fight myself like at least a dozen times. I love it. It's awesome, especially because I don't particularly like Conor McGregor. But UFC 202, the question on the table was, is Conor McGregor, is he actually good? Is he a blip? Or is he going to continue to win these fights? And he sort of passed the test. But only, questionably.
I mean, it's an interesting fight in retrospect because it's, Diaz would not look any good from that point onwards at all. In some ways, he doesn't look that good in the fight.
No, he really doesn't.
But it is still, it's still McGregor fighting through what is obviously a profoundly uncomfortable style of matchup and place for him to be in. And yeah, this would kind of be the last time he'd do anything like that, and the last time you could say something like that about him.
Honestly, yeah. Yeah.
But it also has, a ton of other, like, fantastic, or at least, like, interesting moments. You get to see the late Anthony Rumble Johnson knocking out Glover Teixeira, who would go on to claim UFC gold. You get to see Cerrone excusing like one of the prettiest combos I've ever seen on Poor Rick's Story.
A brief but bright second prime at welterweight.
You get to be reminded that this sport is still for racist thugs. When you get to see Mike Perry racistly knock out Young Yu Lim.
Yeah.
Like, we came from the bottom, and in some ways we're still at the bottom.
Came from the bottom, here we are.
And if you're into that, there's Colby Covington on it somewhere as well.
Yeah, and you didn't even mention, I mean, this is like, if you want to get into some cool dark horse fighters, Tim Means versus Sabah Homasi is just an awesome performance that opens this main card. And you deserve to see a little Tim Means if you're getting into MMA. Okay. Next up, and we are reaching the end of our list here, we selected UFC 217 as an event that must be seen. And I have mixed feelings about this one, Phil. Because, like, GSP Bisping, I just have a sour taste. People remember it so fondly. I still have a weirdly sour taste in my mouth about that. I think I was resentful because I wanted Robert Whittaker to get a already by then much deserved shot at the belt.
Uh-huh.
And he definitely would have beaten Michael Bisping. He would have destroyed him.
What?
Well, okay. Maybe I go too far. But yeah, he would have...
Whittaker would have beaten old, one-eyed Michael Bisping?
He would have head-kicked Bisping into oblivion, which Bisping doesn't, at that point, certainly didn't deserve. But it is still a cool moment in the main event that GSP just sort of drags himself out of retirement. Kind of looks bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, looks like the GSP who sort of awkwardly struggled against, like, Nick Diaz and Carlos Condit, but worse. Kind of gasses. But also discovers, like, a finishing instinct that he'd, like, had never actually had in his prime, and just goes out there and dusts Michael Bisping with a left hook. And some disgusting ground and pound.
Yeah. It's a great kind of... It is a good final act for GSP.
Very much so.
You get to see that he was you get to see some of the grit and some of the hidden depths that were contained in him when he couldn't just hold his opponent off with a jab and a low kick and a takedown.
Yeah.
You also get to see, TJ Dillashaw knocking out Cody Garbrandt in one of the funniest.
Yep.
One of the funniest KOs you'll ever see, which would only be made obviously that much funnier when he would go out and repeat it almost note for note in their rematch.
Yeah, a result which it's worth remembering at this point in your MMA journey was eerily presaged by a game of tetherball on one of the last interesting seasons of The Ultimate Fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Fight that played exactly as the tetherball challenge did, with Dillashaw just breaking Cody Garbrandt by essentially refusing to be killed by him.
We don't have much. We haven't had as much women's MMA as perhaps we might have so far, but this does have a great sort of turning point moment where Rose Namajunas knocks out Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Unfortunately, there are some fighters who just don't seem to be on particularly great cards.
Yeah.
This was a problem with, I think, Anderson Silva, Ronda Rousey, and to some extent Khabib.
Yeah.
But also Joanna. I mean, it was partially because Joanna was used to anchor, often used to anchor fight nights or things like that. But she was, So this is kind of, fortunately, we don't get to see any of Joanna's kind of trademark wins, but we get to see Rose's improbable rise to the title. Yeah,
my favorite Joanna fight is the rematch with Gadelha. That's my favorite performance of hers that you really should see. And I think it's on an Ultimate Fighter finale card or something.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. There's Stephen Thompson thrashing Jorge Masvidal in a fight which everyone promptly memory hold afterwards because they wanted to really like Jorge Masvidal and pretend he wasn't a dickhead.
Yep.
And also that he was the best striker in the division.
Got completely tuned up by Wonderboy.
And Paulo Costa wiping poor Johnny Hendricks the fuck out.
Yep.
In one of the more brutal old man snuff matches you could possibly book.
Yeah.
And probably one of the all-time Glue Factory fights outside of, Prime Pride.
Yeah. And let me tell you, they made an impressive quantity of glue out of Johnny Hendricks.
They really did.
that one kept the neighboring stamp factory stocked up for 3 full days. So finally, are we only one event forward? Really? UFC 218. Of course. Wow, 2017 really was just a banner year for UFC pay-per-views, wasn't it?
It kind of was, yeah.
Yeah. I think we probably were all saying that at the end of the year, too. This, of course, is Max Holloway versus Jose Aldo 2, and is just top to bottom an absolutely disgustingly loaded fight night card. It's got the UFC debut, I believe, of Dominic Reyes, a fascinatingly successful example of the blip prospect, who arguably made it all the way to the belt. Like Cody Garbrandt's another one. All the way to the belt, and then just turned out to be a flash in the pan. But further up on the card, I mean, Holloway-Aldo is an incredible fight. Another one sort of like McDonald-Lawler, where there's like this intense feeling of heroism in the losing fighter's performance that is just...
harrowing.
Useless. Harrowing heroism. Yeah. You really feel like you're watching somebody get murdered. So that's cool. But then if you want to see an actual murder, you've got Francis Ngannou versus Alistair Overeem.
Yeah, poor Overeem has not done well on this list, but yeah, Ngannou punches him into outer space. You get to see Henry Cejudo winning a weapon-like performance over future Bellator champion Sergio Pettis.
Yeah,
and you get to see one of the sort of Four Kings of Violence matchups in Eddie Alvarez against Justin Gaethje, and maybe it's one of the better ones, but it's really hard to tell because all of those fights are fucking fantastic.
Yeah, a fight in which Eddie Alvarez went in with the stated goal of proving himself the most violent fighter. And, basically just like tore Justin Gaethje apart in a fight that very few other people can afford to have with Justin Gaethje. Awesome.
So good.
Yeah. And then a couple of really notable sort of asterisk fights on the prelims. Paul Felder versus Chucky Olives is a fight that I have constant occasion to bring up. I've been bringing it up in reference to people saying that Pereira is the quote-unquote better striker than Adesanya. I'm like, well, Chucky Olives is the better grappler, isn't he? And this is a great example of somebody going into someone else's supposed wheelhouse and being reminded that fighting style, like the archetypal sort of definition, is not actually the same thing as skill set. And that somebody being the quote-unquote better grappler does not mean that they are less prone to, say, a tendency to break under pressure. And that happens to Charles Oliveira in his supposed area of expertise. One of a couple times Paul Felder did that to people. And then David Tamer Drakkar Close is just a terrible, terrible robbery. So, not even a robbery, a terrible officiating decision where the referee takes a point from David Tamer for winning. Do you remember that?
Don't actually.
Drakkar Close is like being completely...
Oh, this is the one where
Yeah.
Drakkar Close is running away and then he takes a point from Tamer for timidity.
Yeah. So
yeah, that was awesome. But also Medeiros Oliveira is an absolutely fantastic slobber knocker.
Yeah, absolutely. So there you go. Frankly, I mean, what is that? 12, 13 events? It's too many.
And
too
many, but also we've missed out so much.
We've missed so much, but if you have to watch all of these and you're to like come to the decision that you like MMA, you really just need like 3 of them. Pick any one of those 3.
Have to say at the end, we also have to say UFC 254 because you have to have Khabib in there somewhere. And
no, you don't.
You do. You have to have Khabib, and this is, I think, it's his most emotional performance. It's his like most surprising strategic performance, and it's his last performance. It's you get to see the kappa of one of MMA's greats, and it's also like it's a really fucking funny fight.
Yeah,
like it's just really funny to watch.
Underrated, silly fight. It looks like there's like banana peels all over the cage. You could put some slapstick comedy music underneath it, and it would feel perfectly appropriate. But it also rules. And that's the thing that happens often in MMA that you should get used to. All right, so I hope
It's also got some Rob Whittaker in it, even if it's just against Jared Cannonier.
Yeah,
you need to watch some Robert Whittaker.
Absolutely. You should have watched him against Michael Bisping. I'll never get over it.
They call me sadistic.
So, I hope you enjoyed this journey, essentially through the history of MMA, but as told in just all-time great events that, like, again, any one of these, unless the only one you watch is UFC 1, maybe, should be enough to convince you whether or not you're kind of into this sport. Because they're all that good. But you also have to watch UFC 1 because it's gross.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, just for the sheer creepy, weird value of it. But yeah, but that's the thing is that you go through this list, and we kept having to add stuff. We were going for 5. We ended up with at least 13.
Yeah.
And there's still so much that we missed. There's so many things that pin the sport up, things that you need to talk about and you need to contextualize. And like incredible moments and so on. So it has been awesome to look back at and to realize like all those. I mean, there were entire eras that we missed out just doing this, and it took us 2 full segments and shitloads of time, and we've still missed a ton of things.
Yeah, it's a cool sport as awful as it is. You should get into it, but you should also feel bad about it periodically. That's part of it. Okay, that'll do it then for this overlong list. And a classic overlong episode, which every one of our disgusting, depraved fans keeps insisting they enjoy. Coming up next week, we have a surprisingly loaded card, Fight Night card, to wrap up 2022's year of pretty dismal Fight Night cards. Stephen Thompson, Kevin Holland, Brian Barberena versus RDA, Matthews Nicolau versus Matt Schnell, Tai Tuivasa, Sergey Pavlovich, Brunson Hermanson, Angela Hill, Emily Ducote. I mean, it's a fantastic card. It really is very, very good for a fight night. So we'll have a good time breaking down those fights for you. And then, again, look forward in the very near future. We're going to have Kyle McLaughlin back on to talk about both Prochaska versus Teixeira 2 and Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez versus Juan Francisco Estrada 3, the epic conclusion of one of the greatest series in modern boxing. So all of that to look forward to. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. I didn't do the Twitter handles. It's fine.
You're a monster. We didn't even tell them that Juan Cutelaba was on 254. Most important thing.
Which fight was it? Oh yeah, one of the Ankalaev.
It was Ankalaev 2, unfortunately. Still very funny.
Still very funny.
Still gets knocked out midway through a pin pan, but not pretending to be knocked out and succeeding.
Yeah. Well, we were bound to miss some things.